We've all experienced it. We're out having a great day with the cooler, relaxing, and the ice eventually melts and creates a pool of water at the bottom. And then one or more of our food items falls in the water, gets waterlogged and starts floating, and is completely unappetizing. And maybe even dangerous if one of the items that's down there floating is raw meat. The basic idea to solve this is to create a tray that fits inside of your cooler. As the ice melts and creates a pool of water, the tray remains suspended up high, holding any food that shouldn't be submerging in the water safely above. Welcome to Swellers and Dwellers. Now, no one tray design is going to work for all coolers, because every cooler is a different shape and size, and blocks of ice come in different sizes, as do bags of cubed ice. So I'm going to give you a couple of different design ideas, and one or a combination of both should give you enough ideas to create a solution that will work for you and your particular cooler. I like to keep one part of the cooler open at full depth so that I can put in larger and taller items like jugs of milk, cans, bottles, and anything else that won't be harmed by being submerged in a little bit of water. The other part of the cooler will have the tray and all of the items that need to be protected from the water. The longest item I would tend to put in here would be a carton of eggs, which is 12 inches long. So that's how long I'll make this tray. And of course it will span the entire width of the cooler. This will also be a place where I'll store fruits, vegetables, and of course any raw meats that are critical to keep away from the water. So the first thing you're going to want to do is identify how long you want your tray to be. I suggest you don't make it any longer than you need to, because having as much open area as possible gives you much more flexibility. Now here's something critical, so pay attention. Many coolers will not be straight-sided. They will taper and will get narrower as you move to the bottom and then be wider at the top. So when you measure your width for your tray, you want to make sure you take the measurement at the height that you want your tray to rest at. And that naturally leads into the beauty of the taper. When you put your tray in, as the cooler narrows, it naturally secures the tray. And the tray simply cannot go any lower. It's too big. And the walls are too rigid to allow it to tip or anything like that. It is in there. I could, if this was wide enough, I could sit in this thing and it would hold me up. Now you're saying, but Sweller, the walls of my cooler don't taper. They're straight. So my tray is just going to plummet right to the bottom. Well, that will lead us into our first design, which is the design you're going to have to use. And so you're saying, well, how high should my tray be? Most blocks of ice are about 6 inches high, and bags of ice are a bit less than that. So I would suggest a good height would be 6 inches. When your ice melts, it's actually going to produce a pool of water that's actually much lower than that. So you could actually make the tray a little bit narrower. So initially, it's actually resting only on the ice and not being supported by the walls of the cooler. And as the ice block melts, the tray will sink lower, but eventually stop above the water line, as long as you make it wide enough so that it doesn't sink right to the bottom of your cooler. Now there's so many variables, I don't know how much water you're going to have at the bottom of your cooler. But if you're pretty confident you'll only ever get 2 inches, you could then actually make the tray that it sits maybe 3 inches above the bottom. So initially it's sitting about 6 inches high because it's being supported by the block of ice. As the ice melts, the tray sinks with it. But eventually, at 3 inches, the tray stops just above the waterline. Now this is getting pretty finicky. If you don't want to bother with that, I would just say make it 6 inches. So the next question is, what are we going to use to make our tray? It has to be water resistant, but extremely strong, and hopefully inexpensive. Well, I have the perfect product. Corrugated plastic. You can find this stuff in places like hardware stores and craft stores. You're probably actually very familiar with it because it's commonly used to make lawn signs. Companies advertising everything from landscaping to music lessons. But it's also commonly used for making political election signs. It's a great way to recycle and find a second use for these kinds of signs. It's extremely strong, and it's manufactured kind of like cardboard. It's corrugated, so it's got channels running in one direction that make it very strong in that direction. The other direction is a little more bendable. So the first thing you want to make sure of is when you cut your tray, you'll want to make sure that the channels of the corrugated plastic are running this direction so that you can take advantage of their strength by bracing it against the sides of the cooler. It makes no sense to have the channels running this way because there's no support on this end. Now here's the easiest tray to make. I've made it out of an old political election sign. I don't want to cause any political controversy, so I've covered mine with a Chinese newspaper. If you do this, make sure you do it after the election and after you voted. If the inside of your cooler doesn't have tapering walls that will make it impossible to support the tray, you'll have to give it legs so it will support itself. So with this design, you're simply going to take a rectangle of corrugated plastic and cut the ends so that it forms a tray. Now just keep in mind that when you make the cut, you need to account for the width of the plastic wall on each end, which is going to make your platform wider. So what I'm saying is, once you find the width of your cooler at the height you want the tray, you want to subtract the width of your corrugated plastic on each end. My corrugated plastic is 1/8 of an inch thick. So off of the measured width of my platform, I'm going to take off 1/8 for this end and 1/8 for this end. And that's how wide I will then make the actual platform. So once you've cut it and folded, you'll actually have some legs which are actually going to support the tray off the bottom of the cooler. But you're probably wondering, Sweller, why have you been holding this piece of plastic in your hand? Well, my friends, it's because the legs of your tray aren't really stable. So when you put a bunch of food on it, they could collapse, and then your whole tray is going to sink into the water, which is where you don't want it. But the solution is simple. On each of your legs, you're going to want to cut out a little notch. One here and one here. So that when you fold it, you can take a bar that you've also cut and insert it into the notches, like so, making a very strong brace. And this brace, again, should be cut with the channels going this way to take advantage of the strength of the corrugated plastic. Now you can put a brace on both ends, but you might not need it, because once you put it into the cooler, that brace on one end should be enough to keep the legs separated and secure. You'll just have to test it out for yourself. This one I've made 12 inches long, and I can put eggs on it and all my other items. Now you're probably saying, but it doesn't have a wall on the end. Well, you know, I've used a version like this for years. If you're careful, I've never really had things slide off, especially if you tilt the tray ever so slightly. If anything moves, it will tend to move towards the wall and not the edge. And plus, you'll likely have all kinds of items over here that will kind of be creating a bit of a wall anyways. So I've never really had a problem with that. But if you think it will be an issue, what you can do is make 2 additional cuts, one here and one here, so that only a small portion act as the legs, and then this middle part you can actually fold up on both sides. So then you'll have a rectangle that will be up here and up here. Then you can take another strip of plastic that you've cut, and to the tabs that we've got sticking up on the ends here, you can just attach this plastic to complete the wall. I know you've got to use your imagination a little bit here, but I think you get what I'm getting at. Now let's get to the more complex version of this. Here you have a complete tray with walls, but you've got no legs. So this is only going to work in coolers that have a taper on the inside, because you'll cut the tray to the width that you need, and it's held in place simply by the strength of the corrugated plastic and the fact that the walls of the cooler are getting narrower and narrower, and the tray just cannot go down. Now this tray is more complex. It's got a lot of cuts and some weird folds, and it's kind of like origami. So let's take a closer look at how to make it. To prepare your corrugated plastic, you're going to first draw out your pattern on it. On mine, I've done a lot of extra labeling just for the demo that you obviously don't have to do on yours. And just a couple of other notes so you don't get confused. This is my finished tray, so it's actually the correct size. But on your plastic, you're obviously going to have extra material on the edges. And second, you're going to be making your scores and cuts on the same side you draw the pattern on. My original pattern, when I was making this, was drawn on the other side, and that's where I made all of my scores and cuts. But again, for this demo, I've redrawn the pattern on my finished tray, and I've done it on the opposite side that I've made the cuts, just to make it easier to show you how everything folds up. But again, you will be cutting and scoring on the same side that you draw the pattern on. Okay, so you've already determined the width that you want your tray and the length. But first, before you draw anything, you've got to make sure that you've oriented the plastic in the right direction, with the corrugated channels flowing across the width of your tray. In the middle of the pattern, you can see I've drawn a rectangle, the length of the platform and the width of the platform. The width is actually 2/8 of an inch shorter than the actual final size that I want for the tray. This is to account for when I fold up both sides of the tray and the thickness of the sheet is added to both ends. Once you've got the rectangle drawn for the platform, you want to add another piece that is the desired height of your wall, and you actually want to do it twice. And that's because you're going to fold it up and then over. Once you've added those wall sections to both ends of the tray, then all you need to do is add another section of the wall height onto both sides. With that, you should have your pattern completely drawn. Now let's talk about cutting and scoring the pattern. First, you'll want to cut around the edge completely to get rid of all the excess. Next, you will make the scores that will enable you to fold the plastic. Now with the scores, you need to be careful because you're not cutting completely through the plastic. The corrugated plastic is 2 sheets with the corrugated channels sandwiched in between. You're only going to be cutting through one of the sheets that will enable you to do the folds while the other sheet remains intact and holds the tray together. There is one exception to this, well actually 4. In each of the 4 corners bordering your platform, you will cut completely through the sheet to enable you to make these folds in all 4 corners. So once you've finished all of your folds and cuts, you will essentially have 2 sections on the ends for walls that will fold up, and then on the other ends you will have also 2 wall sections that are double height that will also fold over. I know you're probably saying, but Sweller, what are these notches you've got cut in 2 corners? Well, you should just ignore them for now and make sure that yours is actually a complete perfect triangle. Now let's take a look at folding and how these notches got there. When I fold the sides up, the ends come in and they're too long, they overlap. So I'm just going to cut one of them shorter. There. You can't have that extra overlap because when you fold the ends up and over, you don't want that uneven layer. Perfect. And there we have it, my friends, a completed box. Now all we have to do is staple these ends together or put some twist ties in there to keep them together. I don't have any blocks of ice right now, so I'm just going to use an empty milk jug to simulate that. I typically would lay one in the corner there, and then we can take our finished box, and we see that it lays securely in there, and it's just at the height of the milk jug. But if I actually take the milk jug out, the tray won't go any lower. It is jammed in there. No matter how much weight of food you put in there, it is not going to tip, and it's not going to descend into the water. Beautiful. Beautiful. And it's long enough to fit a carton of eggs and a bunch of vegetables. All kinds of things will go in there. Now, as you can see, if I had a bigger sheet of plastic, I would have made these walls higher, so that in essence, the base of the tray would be the height it is now. It's just that with more plastic, I could have made the walls higher, so the walls would have actually come right up to maybe this level, just to give me that extra height. But up until I had this new tray, my old tray didn't even have walls. And I used to put all kinds of things on it, and it rarely fell off, so I'm not too worried about it. Anything that's small that might fall out, I'll put it at the bottom, and then, I mean, even eggs can just even sit above. It's not going to be a problem. It'll be okay. And on the other end of the cooler, we have the full depth, so we can buy an entire carton of milk and put it in there, and if it gets into the pool of water, it's not a problem, because it's protected by the plastic. Being surrounded by the melted water will just help to keep it cool. So I would put things like milk on this side, anything in a container that is not really susceptible to being submerged in the water. If you appreciate the fact that I'm not flaunting my half-naked girlfriend around in this video or on the thumbnail, but concentrate instead on simply making good, valuable content for you, I would be humbled if you would consider subscribing to my channel, because it's the only way you can support me and let me know you like what I'm doing and you want me to continue. And give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Until next time, stay cool, my friends.